Hey everybody, it is Wednesday, October 30th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast as we begin the final countdown here to the election. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
Are we there yet?
Are we there yet? We're almost there, 6 days.
In the words of my kids, I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines on this National Candy Corn Day. Apparently October 30th, Jill. They didn't even make National Candy Corn Day Halloween. They made the day before Halloween.
It is a little strange, but I guess to get us in the mood, perhaps?
They want to have their own day. They want to have their own day just for the candy corn because it's a controversial thing. So, I don't know. Where do you stand on the candy corn?
Not so into it. Like I don't have a strong opinion either way, but that's not my candy of choice.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've never understood it. I feel like I made like projects in elementary school, like gluing the candy corn to like a paper plate, to make like a turkey or whatever around the holiday season. Never enjoyed eating it. People are lying if they enjoy eating it. That's my view. That's my controversial take on this National Candy Corn Day.
That is a hot take, Moshe. If you truly like candy corn, we want to hear from you.
We want to hear from you, the true believers.
Okay, what else could be happening today? Let's get to some headlines. 6 days until the election, Kamala Harris makes what she is calling her closing argument at the Ellipse in D.C. Donald Trump on the campaign trail in the important swing state of Pennsylvania as his campaign is continuing to deal with fallout after his rally at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, he was talking directly to the Puerto Rican community there in Pennsylvania yesterday.
From the horse race to the policies, a look at which candidate will add more to the debt and deficit.
The question is just how much? How much more debt are you willing to take on in these next 4 years?
And weirdly, why doesn't anyone care?
We'll get into that.
Overseas, Hezbollah announces its new leader. Who is he and why Israel says he will not be in the position for very long? Back to politics, Trump ally Steve Bannon is out of prison and already back hosting his podcast. What he had to say about his time behind bars. Some new numbers show consumers are feeling pretty confident despite uncertainty surrounding the election. Why Bitcoin is soaring. And a major cheese heist. Scammers stole nearly $400,000 worth of British cheddar cheese.
What do you do with all that cheese, Jill?
Well, that is the question, right? Where's it going?
Where's it going? You have a limited amount of time there to sell and use the cheese.
Well, I guess cheese, though, does have a long shelf life, right?
Cheddar? I mean, I don't know. If you keep it in the fridge, I guess you have some time, but I digress.
One of our more bizarre tangents. And Moshe, the most popular Halloween candy in each state.
Jill, I endorse this candy because it turns out candy corn is not the most popular Halloween candy in each state.
Plus Moshe is on this day in history.
I got 3 words for you, Jill. The parking garage.
I think somehow, Moshe, I think I actually know what you're talking about.
I figured you might.
All right, let's get to the news here. 6 days until Election Day. But Moshe, who's counting?
We are, Jill.
To the minute. Both candidates are on the campaign trail making their final arguments. On Tuesday night, Kamala Harris delivered a major speech at the Ellipse, which is the same park near the White House, where then President Donald Trump spoke to his supporters before they descended on the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. Her campaign is calling this her closing argument. She actually had to amend the permit for the event, which originally called for about 20,000 people to attend. So she upped that to 40,000 people in attendance. The setting is certainly symbolic, especially as she issued some pretty blunt warnings about what a second Donald Trump presidency could look like.
He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election. An election that he knew he lost. America, this is not a candidate for president who is thinking about how to make your life better. This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power.
So that was a bit of the speech there. The backdrop was a lit up White House, incidentally, with Joe Biden inside the White House. So she was out there on the National Mall. Part of the goal here was to get folks to really imagine her as president with that backdrop. So there are multiple goals here with this speech. Obviously, the site there, super important. She wanted to strike a contrast there with the speech Trump gave almost 4 years ago from that same exact spot. But then she was also talking about unity, lifting people up, being a president for all Americans, some of the issues she's running on, making housing affordable, reproductive rights, the economy, etc. The campaign really has an all of the above approach right now. They want to hit all the people who either are thinking about voting for her and haven't yet firmed that up, or the genuine, few percent people who are undecided somewhere in the middle. And so they've decided to hit on the fascistic tendencies of Donald Trump and some of his words and some of the words of his advisors in recent weeks. So the whole theme of fascism, you can't trust him, no guardrails, that's been a huge thing. One of the campaign advisors tells me they really want to remind Americans about the PTSD they had from those 4 years, given that it's been a few years. At the same time, they want to get liberals off the couch. And so trying to figure out ways to get them to vote while also trying to get independents, Nikki Haley voters who are unsure. And they're hoping that, reminding folks again about what she's doing, but also why Trump is bad, will do that. Incidentally, last night, speaking of Nikki Haley, who has not been out on the campaign trail for Donald Trump, even though she has endorsed him, she was on Fox News last night. They said, "Why haven't you been out there?" And she goes, "He hasn't called me. We've told him we're available, but ultimately he hasn't called me, and I'm happy to help him if he wants." She did warn Nikki Haley on Fox yesterday that the campaign's messaging has not been great for women, and they need to keep that in mind, especially in light of that rally we've been talking about at Madison Square Garden back on Sunday.
For his part, Donald Trump pointing fingers at Harris, accusing her of running a, quote, campaign of absolute hate. He and his campaign are still dealing with the fallout from his rally at Madison Square Garden, particularly remarks from comedian Tony Hinchcliffe disparaging Puerto Rico. As we reported yesterday, the Trump campaign issued a rare statement saying that those comments do not reflect those of the campaign. Trump, though, is really pushing back against criticisms of that rally. He said at a press conference that it was, quote, an absolute love fest.
The love in that room, it was breathtaking, and you could have filled it many, many times with the people that were unable to get in. But politicians that have been doing this for a long time, 30 and 40 years, said there's never been an event so beautiful. It was like a love fest, an absolute love fest, and it was my honor to be involved.
Love fest or not, Moshe, Trump definitely has some work to do to repair his relationship with the Puerto Rican community. The president of the Republican Party's branch in Puerto Rico has said that he will not vote for Donald Trump unless Trump apologizes for the racist remarks made at his rally.
Yeah, and for now, Trump was asked about it. He said, "I've never heard of this comedian. I don't know who he is. I didn't watch his performance at my rally," and sort of just wanted to move on from that. By the way, not the first issue he's had with folks in Puerto Rico. You might remember Hurricane Maria back during his presidency, him going down there, throwing paper towels. Just it's been a complicated relationship with the Americans who live down in Puerto Rico. In the meantime, though, it's been interesting to see the fallout of this, including some Republicans who are calling this out, embarrassed by this, annoyed by this. Megyn Kelly, you might remember her from Fox News. She's a conservative commentator now with a podcast. She's a Trump supporter, but she made a point in her most recent podcast of calling out the campaign. Take a listen to this.
It was too brotastic, okay? It was. You're trying to win an election in which you're hemorrhaging female voters. Maybe when you present in front of hundreds, thousands at least, at Madison Square Garden, you clean up the bro talk just a little so you don't alienate women.
So that's some of the commentary you're hearing out there. Trump himself was asked about the rally late Tuesday night on Fox News in an interview with Sean Hannity. Trump in that interview says he doesn't know who booked the comedian and did say in the interview that he thinks it was a mistake, that comedian should not have been there. Trump reiterating his love for the Puerto Rican community. In fact, Trump saying in the interview last night on Fox that he believes he has done more for Puerto Rico than any other president in history. It did come as Trump was in Pennsylvania Tuesday among other audiences. He was talking to Puerto Ricans in the state. They make up a key constituency group, several 100,000 Puerto Rican voters in Pennsylvania. And as he was dealing with that, he was handed a gift in the form of the latest Joe Biden gaffe. Yes, the president was doing a virtual event yesterday. He has not been invited, as we discussed yesterday, to a campaign with Kamala Harris. But he is doing some virtual events and is out there on his own. So he was doing an event for Latinos virtually here when the Trump rally and the insult to the Puerto Rican population from that comic came up. And so this is Biden discussing that and taking a shot at Trump supporters.
In my home state of Delaware, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of seen as unconscionable.
So, Jill, this reminds people of Hillary Clinton's infamous comment back in 2016 when she called Trump supporters a basket of deplorables back in 2016. That didn't go over back then. 8 years later, the comment calling Trump supporters garbage did not go over well. And it just took a couple hours there as this thing started to go viral online before I saw a tweet pop into my feed from, who else? Joe Biden. He writes the following, a clarification, if you will. Quote, earlier today, I referred to the hateful rhetoric about Puerto Rico spewed by Trump's supporter at Madison Square Garden as garbage, which is the only word I can think of to describe it. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable. That's all I meant to say. The comments at that rally don't reflect who we are as a nation. So he says that he meant to refer to the rhetoric as garbage, not the supporters as garbage. But we all know Biden, not great with his words sometimes. So it came out as supporters are garbage. He says again that he meant to refer to the rhetoric itself as garbage. Nevertheless, clearly getting circulated overnight. You can expect campaign ads, this to be texted to voters across the country here. As we've been talking about, the campaigns will use whatever they got in the final days. Democrats were all juiced up from those comments by the comedian at the Trump rally, got them motivated. You saw Obama talking about them, everyone talking about them on the campaign trail, being like, can you believe the stuff happening on the Republican side? Well, now with this Joe Biden comment calling supporters garbage, you can imagine Republicans will not be getting that clarification. That won't be circulated widely. The original comment will be circulated widely. And so that will be played on repeat by the Trump campaign over the course of these next few days before Tuesday. It's one of the many reasons the Harris folks have separated themselves from President Biden. He is known for his gaffes. His approval level is very low. And as we mentioned yesterday, he's been available to go on the campaign trail, and they have not invited him out. And so you saw him put his foot in his mouth with this latest remark. Trump, Pennsylvania, yesterday, state has several 100,000 Puerto Ricans, and so ultimately could make the difference in a state where the margin could be less than 100,000 votes. The Trump campaign, trying to basically dismiss it, move on here, or address it, move on here. Either way, both campaigns right now, beyond all that, confident in what they're seeing in terms of early voting. I posted these headlines over on Instagram. You have Democratic strategists telling the New York Times they feel very confident that the race is shifting in her favor. You have Republican strategists and Trump strategists saying we feel very confident that the race has shifted in our favor. Trump is very superstitious, so he doesn't want to get ahead of himself here. But the description inside the Trump campaign right now is that in 2020, in 2016, people were searching for good tidbits of news. In 2024, things seem to be going in such a good way for them, at least until recently, that they're looking for tidbits of bad news. Like, wait, let's dig around here for some bad numbers. So they're feeling good, especially since the polling right now is super close. And the last two elections, the polls have shown Trump has outperformed the polls. The question, of course, is, are the polls actually accurate this time? Have they corrected for the last two elections? And in that case, are these an accurate reflection of what's going on? If they haven't, feel very good if you're Donald Trump. If they have, well, it's still going to be super, super close. Then you have the Harris campaign, which apparently believes they're back to a solid position in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, the so-called blue wall, the Democratic blue wall. But even so, they're feeling better about Georgia and Nevada right now. Apparently, right now, Arizona and North Carolina do feel out of reach for them, but they'll see what happens. Watch where the candidates go. The candidates are going to the places where they think they can win. Haven't seen Harris in Arizona for a bit, so that gives you an indication that ultimately here, She's not, she's going to the places like Michigan, hitting that like, every other day right now, trying to win those voters. So that's the situation there. More than 40 million Americans have early voted. And then you have ad spending. If you live in certain states, I feel bad for you. Literally all the ad slots are bought up in certain states. And right now, Republicans are actually outspending Democrats when it comes to commercials in Pennsylvania right now, as well as Wisconsin. The Harris campaign spending big on TV in Michigan. Don't know how much of an impact the ads have at this point when like literally, first of all, if you're watching TV with commercials, every commercial break is just Harris ad, Trump ad, Harris ad, Trump ad, Harris ad, and, who knows what's breaking through.
And Moshe, from the horse race to the actual issues, there's some new analysis about how both candidates will put the country trillions of dollars further into debt. The question is by how much? The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a nonpartisan group, is out with its latest analysis. It finds both Trump's and Harris's plans are going to majorly increase the budget deficit, contributing to our national debt. But Trump by much more than Harris. They say it also depends, though, on who winds up winning control of Congress, meaning that whomever wins the presidency may or may not actually be able to get their agendas passed. According to the group, Harris is likely to increase the debt by about $4 trillion, Trump by about $8 trillion. The most costly elements of Harris's plan, expanding the child tax credit and earned income tax credit. Harris has proposed a mix of spending programs focused on the middle class and also tax increases on the rich. But the group points out that that would not fully pay for her spending plans. As for Trump, he has proposed a large tax cut focused on the wealthy and not enough spending cuts or tariffs to pay for it. And Moshe, there's also polls that show voters apparently don't really care about the soaring deficit.
Yeah, that's the thing. It doesn't appear that the candidates care. It doesn't appear that the voters care. There's a recent poll CNBC put out. We put out a clip of it yesterday on Instagram that it's the 10th most important issue to voters right now. And it is one thing to have deficits during bad times like COVID and issues like that when we do need to spend in order to keep the economy afloat. But typically, as it used to go, when the economy is strong, you pay off that debt. Well, we haven't really been doing that. And ultimately here, the question is, do people not care about it? Do voters not care about it because politicians aren't talking about it? Or do politicians not care about it because voters aren't talking about it? So is the chicken or the egg here? Which came first? And who is influencing who? Either way, that's a situation where about 35 trillion going on 36 trillion in debt here. And we still have a very good credit rating here in the US. We're still, good for it, I'll say, right? Ultimately think about that, you take out a mortgage, or you take out a car loan. The average American lives in a certain amount of debt because they know they have a job, income coming in, and they can pay off that debt. The feeling in America for years is like, okay, we bring in about $6 trillion a year. We're in 10 trillion of debt. We're in 20 trillion of debt. Yeah, we could pay that off in a couple of years. Now we're approaching, 36 trillion in debt. And with these plans, we'll surpass $40 trillion in debt. And the big thing that's going to come up, Jill, next year, whether it's President Trump or President Harris, is the 2017 Trump tax cuts. That was $1.5 trillion. Remember, if you cut taxes, that's less money coming in, being paid in taxes to the government. How is the government going to pay for itself? Because we don't really cut anything. There's, less and less discretionary spending to cut because the majority of what the government's paying for is interest on said loans to pay for everything. The defense budget, nobody's going to cut that. The military budget, no one's going to cut that. Social Security, Medicare, no one wants to cut that. So there's not that much when you think about cutting, and then each of those programs are considered super vital to certain people. So can you nibble around the edges with 10 billion here, 50 billion here? Perhaps. But nothing like what we're about to see here. So these tax cuts are coming up. Trump wants to renew them completely, which is why you see that his debt number will go higher because he means across the board, including rich people, everyone's getting the tax cut continued, less money coming in. Harris only wants to continue the tax cut for people making under $400,000. If you make more than that, she wants to go back to the previous taxes. That's why we see us going up in debt, but not as much as Trump. Now, whether any of that can happen, not clear. It does look like the Senate's going Republican here. So Harris, very unlikely that there's a trifecta of power, that she has the House, the Senate, and the White House. Trump, does have that opportunity. And either way, that Republican Senate, unlikely to want to raise taxes on the rich there, about $400K. So you're looking at the sort of closer to the Trump scenario here on the potential deficit here. And again, they have ranges. I linked to it we linked to it in the newsletter. We linked to it on Instagram that like the low case for Harris is $1 trillion extra. The high case is like 10 trillion. For Trump, the low case is $3 trillion and the high case is $15 trillion. Because remember, Trump's also promising no more taxes on tips, no more taxes on overtime, no more taxes on Social Security. I mean, he's been going out there being like, you get a tax cut, you get a tax cut, you get a tax cut. And so, well, where does all that money come from? Well, the government, and the government still has to pay for everything.
Moshe, I do appreciate the Oprah reference.
You get a car and you get a car. I mean, honestly, we had 6 days to go. Trump could promise people cars, but he's been going hard on all the tax cut promises.
I mean, Elon Musk is already giving out $1 million a day.
I'm waiting for him to give everyone a Tesla at this point.
You know what? That
could pop.
Could work.
I don't know, Elon, if you're listening, you promise everyone a Tesla. I don't know. That could actually be election interference. Who knows?
All right, time for the speed read. From Reuters, Hezbollah has named Naim Qassem as its new leader on Tuesday. So who is he? He's been around a while. He was appointed Hezbollah's deputy chief in 1991. He remained in his role when the previous leader, Hassan Nasrallah, took over in the early 90s. And he has long been one of Hezbollah's leading spokesmen, conducting interviews with foreign media. After leading the group for about 30 years, Nasrallah was killed on September 27th in an Israeli air attack on Beirut's southern suburbs. And senior Hezbollah figure Hashem Safadine, who was considered the most likely successor, he was then killed in an Israeli airstrike a week later.
Yeah, so next up, Qassem, who has fled Lebanon, it turns out, for Iran. That's where he is right now, in Tehran. After his predecessor, the leader, was killed, and then the successor was killed. He got out of Dodge on an Iranian plane, apparently, recently. So that is where he is right now. Since Nasrallah's killing last month, Qassem has given several televised addresses. He's considered by many in Lebanon to lack the charisma and gravitas of Nasrallah, who really took Hezbollah and grew the terror group into effectively the richest and best armed terrorist group in the world. So that's Qassem trying to lead the group from Iran right now. The Israelis naturally reacted to this, saying his tenure will be, quote, temporary. Of course, they've killed Nasrallah, they killed Safadine, and they say that the Israeli defense minister put out yesterday a post on X saying, temporary appointment, not for long. So there you have it. The Israelis have shown that they're able to target folks inside Iran. Of course, there was an attack over the weekend, but they did kill the head of Hamas inside Iran earlier this year. So you can imagine there's a lot of security precautions being taken for this guy in what is a typically pretty dangerous position, but even more dangerous in recent months as the war escalates with the Israelis.
From NPR, Steve Bannon, the right-wing podcaster and one-time political advisor to former President Trump, was released from federal prison Tuesday morning after serving 4 months behind bars for contempt of Congress. Bannon, if you remember, was convicted in 2022 on 2 counts for defying subpoenas from the House Select Committee that was investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol by a mob of Trump supporters.
Yeah, and then he also refused to provide documents related to his involvement in Trump's efforts to overturn the race. So he stood firm there, going through a trial. Bannon yesterday blamed Nancy Pelosi, the former House Speaker, for sending him to prison. He didn't mention the fact that a jury convicted him and a judge sentenced him as well. But he says he is empowered by his time in prison. He said in a press conference yesterday, I'm more energized and more focused than I've ever been in my entire life. He was up in Danbury at prison there. He's back on his podcast, which I should note is like a top 10 news podcast called The War Room, where Bannon goes off about Democrats and strategy moving forward. Unclear here if he's going to have any sort of role with Trump. That does not appear so, at least not at the moment. They sort of have an on-again, off-again, on-again, off-again relationship. But he did say already yesterday, Trump's got to do what he did in 2020 and even go further, saying that even if the numbers show him down or the numbers show him apparently losing the election, he should claim victory and fight.
Now to some economic news from CNBC. Consumers grew more optimistic about the U.S. economy despite heading into this contentious presidential election. And even as job openings hit multi-year lows, that is according to separate reports released Tuesday. Also on the money front, some crypto news from Forbes. Bitcoin rose about 6% to as high as $73,000 on Tuesday afternoon, which is the highest price for the token since March, and way outpacing the overall stock market. So what is behind Bitcoin's climb? Turns out a confluence of factors.
Yeah, a couple things here. Trump's gotten super pro-Bitcoin. He used to hate crypto during his first term, called it, effectively corrupt, the instrument of criminals. Now he's totally into it. He's reversed his position on crypto. And so as there's increasing excitement and a belief that Trump will win, crypto is going up, with all the traders really excited about policies that will really be pro-crypto. I heard from some folks who've been very, very frustrated by the Biden administration and by Harris and the lack of embrace when it comes to crypto. And then you have sort of a throwback to our previous story, Jill. We told you about the policies here from Harris and Trump that are going to increase the debt by a big number, potential additional tax cuts. Well, what does that mean? More money in the system. Well, what does that mean? Inflation. And they see Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation. They also believe that the Fed will then be forced to raise interest rates. You see how all these things are interrelated? Tax cuts, more money out there, inflation. Inflation goes up, the Fed's got to cut interest rates. And so basically you have a bunch of people trading crypto, betting on a sequence of events, a domino of events here. By the way, if you're interested in more on this, there's a discussion I had for our special joint episode we did with the Wall Street Skinny co-hosts. It's over on the Mo News Interview podcast, where we talked a bit about the election. It's sort of a joint episode, but they talked a bit about how Wall Street is looking at this election. So go check that out over on the Mo News Interview pod.
From the New York Times, it has been called the Great Cheese Robbery. That is great, Grate, Moshe.
You get it? I get it, Jill. I get it. Great cheese, grating cheese.
But it is no joke to the tight-knit world of artisanal British cheesemakers, which is reeling from the disappearance of 22 metric tons of rare cheddar worth about $400,000.
Jill, 22 metric tons, just Google that for us non-metric types here in America. That is 48,000 pounds of cheese.
So this appears to be the biggest con to hit their industry in decades. It started in July. That is when Neal's Yard Dairy, which is a leading London cheese retailer, said it had received a major order from what appeared to be a, quote, legitimate wholesale distributor for a major French retailer. The company had to actually turn to 3 separate cheese producers to fill the order because one could not provide that much cheese by itself.
No, 50,000 pounds of cheese, just, for those experienced with this, you got to go to multiple places.
So the owner of one of the dairy farms said that he was initially really flattered that a French chain wanted to buy that much British cheddar cheese.
That might have been the first clue, folks. The French, they really take pride in everything that they do. But they said, hey, Brits, we want some of your cheese. So Neal's Yard sends the cheese off in 2 shipments in September. The payment was due earlier this month on October 7th. Well, the money never came, and they tried to chase up the payment, got no response. They say that the contacts became uncontactable. They then called the police on October 21st, 2 weeks after the money was due, saying, hey, I think we've been scammed. We just shipped them a ton of cheese, or I should say 22 metric tons of cheese. So apparently this is not the first time criminals have hit the dairy industry. Who knew? There's like these dairy crooks out there. Back in 2015, there was a gang that arrested $875,000 worth of Parmesan. In Wisconsin, someone stole a trailer with $46,000 worth of cheese. There was a cheese heist in Britain, a famous one back in the 90s, where they made off with 6 tons of cheddar. So apparently these cheese thieves this is a thing. The police are investigating who stole the cheese, who cut the cheese, whatever you want to say. The industry is urging vigilance. If you get a big order of cheese, make sure it's legit on the other end, and maybe get like a down payment. That's my suggestion to you.
That's right. The payment comes first.
Yeah. Listen, in these times of cheese thieves, I at least need half, if not all of it.
And finally, from Axios, with Halloween tomorrow, a look at the most popular candy across the country. According to data from Instacart, chocolate is America's favorite Halloween candy, with Reese's Peanut Butter Cups once again the top choice in an overwhelming majority of states. The chocolate peanut butter candy was the top selling candy in 40 states based on Instacart grocery sales last year. After Reese's, regular M&Ms were the next most popular candy and the favorite in northwestern and midwestern states like Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And peanut M&Ms were the most purchased Halloween candy in Hawaii, Idaho, and Utah, according to Instacart.
Yeah, we're basically a Reese's Peanut Butter Cup nation, most of it. Just it was that central part of the country, that sort of northern plains. That's where you guys are feeling M&Ms. I don't know what to say about the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Montana with the regular M&Ms being number one. Like, I agree with Idaho and Utah. Peanut M&Ms. If you're going to go with an M&M, that is the way to go. You got to talk to your neighbors over there in the Dakotas.
However, to play devil's advocate.
Oh, Jill, go ahead. Devil's advocate on behalf of regular M&Ms. Go.
On behalf of kids who have peanut allergies.
Oh.
Okay. A lot of people, I think, besides the fact that it's like 1 in 12 kids have a food allergy, peanut being the most common, a lot of people, parents especially, are really cognizant of it and maybe aren't buying peanut M&Ms to give out as a Halloween candy.
All right. So then maybe the reverse is true, which is I can't believe you guys in Idaho and Utah would do such a thing and risk the health of the trick-or-treaters who are coming to your home. Okay. Anyway, I digress. But back to candy corn for a second on this National Candy Corn Day, because we got some new Google Trend data on candy corn, the most searched for candy in 34 states between early September and October. So you guys are searching for it. Maine. The candy corn in Maine is 138%. The purchases are higher there than the national average. New Hampshire, you guys up in the New England states, you guys are really into candy corn. Are you guys doing other stuff, art projects? Let me know. What is happening? Or are you just really into eating candy corn there in New Hampshire and in Maine? And so these are a bunch of the surveys that you see. We're also getting some numbers on how much people are spending. This year, most of you, at least the average out there, plan to spend $103, just over $103 on candy. That is down from last year's record, $108 on candy. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in 1938. Orson Welles' The War of the Worlds airs on CBS Radio, causing panic among thousands of listeners. It depicted a Martian invasion of Earth, but they did not warn people that it was satire, that it was fiction. And so people tuning to the radio, where they got their news, are hearing about this invasion by aliens, freaking out. Apparently, phone calls were made into the government. People didn't know it was fiction. They thought it was breaking news. And so the FCC investigates it. And CBS, which broadcasted, said, listen, in the future, we'll let people know when we make up that aliens are invading Earth. The broadcast, though, helped a very young Orson Welles, who was 23 at the time, land a contract with Hollywood. And so just a little bit later, he would direct a film you might know as Citizen Kane, called by many the greatest American film ever made. All right, fast forward to the 1960s here. On this day in 1961, the Soviets detonated Tsar Bomba over the Arctic Ocean. It was the largest nuclear weapon ever set off, producing the most powerful human-made explosion ever recorded. On this day in 1968, Marvin Gaye scores his first #1 hit. The hit, of course, I Heard It Through the Grapevine. Jill, do you remember the California Raisins? That was a 90s thing.
Of course I do.
That was
the theme commercial,
song.
Yes.
I mean, listen, yesterday we were talking Got Milk. Today, the California Raisins. I Heard It Through the Grapevine. All right, Jill, speaking of the 90s, the clue earlier was the parking garage. I think you knew what I was talking about. It's celebrating its 33rd anniversary today.
Moshe, one of the more classic Seinfeld episodes, and very typical Seinfeld, where it's kind of just the 4 main characters stuck in the same place, just having really funny banter and dialogue. And you're like, they really just, the whole thing was pretty much in this
the whole
one
episode, we're going to spend the whole half an hour
garage.
in a parking garage and, see hilarity ensues. There's also, one of my favorites was the Chinese waiting to sit at the Chinese restaurant. And another episode where literally the whole episode takes place, them waiting to sit at a restaurant.
I think that's actually one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, I agree. I'll take Chinese restaurant over a parking garage. All right. We end here with a bit of music history. On this day in 2015, Adele goes to #1 on the singles chart in the UK with Hello. It remains one of the best-selling digital singles of all time. And let's end with this. On this day in 1971, John Lennon's sophomore solo album, Imagine, 53 years old today.
Moshe, an uplifting and wonderful message that couldn't feel more distant from where we currently are as a nation, as a globe.
Right. Like, such a nice concept. Thank you, John Lennon. Jill, I mean, the problem is that COVID ruined Imagine for me, that celebrity cover where you're like Gal Gadot and Maya Rudolph and Natalie Portman all like singing Imagine. And I know it was like intended for positive effect, but I'm just like, I don't know, it felt a bit cringy to me. So I'm hoping I can like return to having a more positive sentiment about Imagine at some point.
That was definitely not the intended effect.
No, not at all. But, that's where I'm at this point.
All right, guys. That's a wrap. 6 days till Election Day. Stick with us. We know it's a stressful time out there, but we will get through it. Thank you for listening to the podcast, the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
And just a heads up, the U.S. Postal Service said that yesterday was the last day to make sure that your ballot gets in on time. It could take up to 7 days. So if you still have a mail-in ballot, you could, potentially get still 6 days left to get it out today, or drop it off at a location that will make sure that your ballot will count.